It's really my pleasure to welcome and introduce someone who is so well known that he doesn't really require introduction from me, but I just very happy to introduce Charlie Ellis, who will share with you his thoughts on retirement issues. Charlie is a person that I don't think will ever retire. But as we know, Charlie's an advisor to a variety of financial institutions, including mutual funds, government organizations. He was a founding partner of Greenwich Associates, an international strategy consulting company. He's taught at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and served on numerous boards, written 16 books and more than 100 articles. It's quite daunting. So my brief introduction can't do full justice to this impressive body of work, but I'll pick out one of his early articles that established his fame was The Loser's Game, and it really documented for the first time how many managers fail to beat the market, which earned him a Graham and Dodd award early in his career, which he then followed up with a book which says how you can actually win the loser's game. I think his most recent book is called Falling Short, The Coming Retirement Crisis and What to Do About It. And I think that's going to be part of the focus of this presentation. Charlie's been a great friend of Yale and SOM, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming him to the podium. Thank you.
Actually, if we're going to applaud, could we just take a minute and applaud Leanne for all the nice things she's done to make this work out so smoothly. You may wonder, what the hell is this picture doing on the screen? I grew up in Marblehead, Massachusetts. That picture hangs in Abbott Hall, the town hall of Marblehead, Massachusetts. And when we were kids, we were taught this was the most important painting in the history of America. And every chance you get, you should show this wonderful painting because it'll cause people to say, yeah, I remember that painting. It's really terrific. At the end of what I'm going to be showing you, you will remember 76 better visually, because this is the spirit of 76, and the essence of what I'm going to be talking about can be captured in a way by the simple number 76. So there's a reason for having a mnemonic that might be useful to you. I have had an unbelievably privileged experience of being involved in the investment management world during absolutely all of its very good years. And as a result of that, I feel an obligation to, from time to time, look at something that's a little bit broader issue in question. Retirement security is probably the most important part of investing for most people when they think about investments and what does it mean for me. Let me put it directly. Singapore is fine, Australia is fine, and Chile is fine. Every other country, one way or another, has a very serious problem accumulating, inevitably going to confront the political and social system of that country. And the United States is one of those countries in which we have got, without any doubt, coming our way, unless we change the variables, we will have a massive political and then social problem in this country because we will have large numbers of people who don't have anywhere near enough money to be secure in their financial circumstances in their retirement years. Wonderful part of this problem is that it could be solved if we would take action within the reasonably short future. Next couple of years, it would be easy. Next decade, it would not be terribly hard. If we wait 2 decades, it'll start to have some real difficulty, and there'll be really good reasons to be putting it off. And if we wait 3 decades, it'll be hurting people in very severe manner in their elder years, particularly the people that don't happen to be affluent. Now, I'm here with a quick description of how did we get into this situation and what could we do about it. And I hope that you'll find this one that you can take away and think about quite carefully. Let me give you a little bit of historical perspective. If you go back to the 18th century, everybody was a farm worker, with a few people who did religious services, a few people in government and a few people in the military. But everybody else worked on the farm. And their work was hard and physical work. And you continued working until you really couldn't work anymore. You stopped working, you would be dead within 1, 2, or 3 years, usually 1 or 2 years. Now, work week was long, 60 hours. Everybody worked. All the kids did, all the grandparents did. If you lived to be a great grandparent, you did too. That's the way it really was. When retirement security started to come in, started with the Civil War veterans, and then it expanded a little bit, and expanded a little bit, and expanded a little bit. But there's some interesting history. If you go back to 1893, Baron von Bismarck in Germany was trying to prove to all the different principal states that he had combined into Germany as a pan-European nation, trying to convince people that this was a really good idea. They weren't all that sure. First of all, they were under the power of Prussia, and Prussia had an idea towards military that meant military service, and conquering France was a normal recreational activity, and there were a variety of different difficulties that people were having. But on the other hand, there were some terrific things going on. One of the things that people liked a lot is Bismarck, to prove that Germany is a major empire, had a really good advantage for individual people, had combined telegraph, one of the new technologies of the time, with the postal service. So you could get a letter mailed and delivered within a day across the entire country. And if you had something that had to be done quicker, you could do it with the telegraph, and people loved it. The other thing he did was really clever, is he built a railroad system so that you could move fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fresh meat, fresh flowers from the countryside into the cities. And you could bring people in the cities out into the countryside for vacations. You could move iron ore and coal to the Ruhr Valley to make steel. And steel was the charismatic characteristic of a great society, great economy. And it was wonderful, and a lot of popularity around the idea of Bismarck's Germany. And then headlines started showing up. And the headlines usually said there's been a terrible train wreck, and people have been killed, and great damage has been done. Well, here's the symbol for Germany as an empire looking like a complete negative. Bismarck, being a very smart guy, put a group of people together to study the problem, and they figured out what was the problem. It was that the work crews, all of whom had been guaranteed lifetime employment if they'd come and work for the railroad. The work crews were noticing some of the guys were just too damn old to lift ties, rails, shovel coal, and do the other kinds of work. So they put them on the easy job, watching the switches and throwing the switch 3, 4, 5 times a day when the main trains came through. But elderly people in their late 60s, early 70s, out there in a sunny afternoon, got another 2 or 3 hours before the next train comes through. You might pull your hat down over your eyes and take a small snooze, knowing comfortably that you'd wake up in plenty of time to throw the switch. But if you didn't wake up in time, there'd be another headline. So Bismarck's challenge to his staff was, okay, you got to solve this problem, but don't spend a hell of a lot of money. And they figured out the minimax. Almost nobody lived as late as 65. And if they did, they died conveniently very quickly thereafter. So you could retire people, continue to pay them, but they wouldn't be allowed to work. And that would solve the problem with most of the accidents on the railroad. It worked very, very well, and he accepted it. And so 65 was established as an appropriate time for retirement in 1893. I point out to you that was a long time ago. Then in the first decade of the 1900s, Neville Chamberlain, Winston Churchill, figuring out what could be done for social services in the United Kingdom, settled on 70 as a retirement age, till someone said, yes, but the Germans have 65. Oh, well, then we'll switch to 65 ourselves, because we can't let the Germans have a better deal than the British people. So they established 65. Then railroad legislation was a very important part of this country's behavior in the 20s, and Congress passed various laws about railroad control, one of which was retirements program. Looked around for precedent. The Germans do it this way, British do it this way, must be the right thing. So they adopted 65. Then in the 30s, Social Security was going to be passed. What age would you choose for Social Security? There was a very strong view that it should be 70. but there was an acceptance that politically it'd probably be smart if we do what everybody else is doing. I'll have what he's having is not all that unusual. So 65 was set with Social Security. And that takes you as far as 1935. And then after that, change and change and change again. After the Second World War, you may have read in the history books, there was a freeze on wage increases to break inflation. So employers were interested in, and with labor unions' encouragement, developed what are called fringe benefits, such as pension funds. And the pension funding made sure that there would be enough money to pay out pension benefits. And that was very attractive from the company's point of view and from the workers' point of view, and it also fit with the social sense of this country right after the Second World War. We wanted to build a better way of being America, and things going very well in terms of our line of work. So you have the movement towards pension funds. The investing was fairly simple, 50-50 portfolios, 50% bonds, 50% stocks. Money center banks dominated, but the insurance companies in many cases were deeply involved. And it was always a defined benefit plan. Strong growth in assets had lots of people feeling positive about this development. It worked out very, very nicely. Social Security, meanwhile, was being reflated or built up to a stronger and stronger program. Getting it through in 1935 had required all kinds of compromises. No agricultural workers would be included. Lawyers, doctors would not be included. Any kind of a resistance group, whether for the employers resisting or the individuals resisting, would be set aside. So it was really a pretty modest crowd of people that got Social Security at the beginning, roughly 1 out of 4 workers. But over time, a series of different changes are made to make Social Security a better and better deal. The benefits were increased from 15% of your pre-retirement income to 28%, and you'll notice later that kept going up and going up farther. You could claim earlier if you wanted to. You could claim at a time when juniority was this very popular argument. People who'd worked in a company long enough and the company was accepting voluntary movement to retirement, it was thrilling that you could retire not at 65, but at 64, or 63, or 62. And so you bring Social Security to benefit with that. Medicare, Medicaid would get blended in with Social Security. It allowed delayed claiming if you really wanted it. And then the benefits were increased, and over time they were increased to roughly 40% of your pre-retirement working. This created what's normally described as the golden age of retirement. Think in terms of the 1950s and early 1960s. And it worked wonderfully well up to that point. Social Security had been increased, and there were defined benefit plans. Most large corporations had a defined benefit plan by 1960, 1965. And the company in those plans made all the contributions, decided on every part of the investing, chose the investment managers, paid all the investment manager fees, and if anything went wrong, they made up the shortfall. They also absorbed all of the risks. So the individual employee was guaranteed a good retirement. Invariably, it had an escalation characteristic, sometimes by agreement, sometimes just by behavior, to offset inflation. And the company took care of everything. You had one responsibility. Let the company know when you change your address so they can send the checks to your new address. Now, we've been having quite a substantial change away from defined benefit to defined contribution or 401k plans. And just run through a couple of things here. When somebody's looking at his IRA, the normal reaction of the normal person is to say, with a big smile, I've got more money in my own name in my 401k than I ever thought I'd ever have. It's just wonderful. I'm pretty sure it's plenty for a retirement. Talk to them tomorrow, they say, well, it's plenty, I hope. And then maybe it's enough, I hope. And then you get the number, and the average balance in the 401k plan or an IRA that's linked with the 401k plan, the average median number, $110,000, and that's going to be spread out over 20 years for the average person. This is a pattern of numbers that simply will not work. There is no way that that is going to be a sufficiency for someone to have anything like a decent retirement. Now, it's not 110,000 for everybody, it's 110,000 average, and it spreads. So look at the bottom of this page, and you'll see that those who are pretty well paid have pretty damn good, oh shoot. Thanks for your patience. Down at the bottom, if you make 150 or more, you're probably going to be fine because the more lifts you. 150 doesn't leave you with a balance of 450, but the 150 and the 200 and the 250, it works out pretty nicely. That may be plenty for the retirement years, but when you go above that, it gets worse and worse and worse very, very rapidly. And those are going to be real people, members of our broadest defined community who are trying to make their way. Now, if you look at a 401k as of the time that they were being created, the 1980s, the largest, best bull market this country has ever had. Inflation is coming down very, very rapidly. Wonderful circumstances and situation. Here's the employee view. I am free to join this plan, but I don't have to. I'm free to match the money that my employer puts in. I don't have to, but I'm free to do it. I'm free to decide the level of contribution I will make. I can make as much as I want to up to some limit, but it's way up there beyond where I would normally go. If I ever need money for any major purpose, to expand my home, to pay for kids' college, to pay off bills, to pay for medical care, I just tap into this big fund. I'm free to decide on the investments. I can do anything I want to do, and you know as well as I do that each one of us is different and unique, and each one of us should have our own investment program, and I'm going to be doing mine, and you should be doing yours so that it's really right for you. You're free to change the investments anytime you want to. You're free to select the investment managers from a wide, wide list. There were companies that had as many as 100 different alternatives that you could choose from. You're free to decide on the payouts. How much do you want to take out? And you're free to take it with you if you go to another employer. 401k Primus, you know yourself better than anybody else. It's your own account. You're free to choose and join. You're free to decide to contribute. You're free to custom tailor. You can borrow anytime you want to. Your money goes right with you. You decide what the payout to be. Wonderful, wonderful characteristics if there's plenty of money to work with. From the sponsor's point of view, it's an even better deal. There's no risk of a sudden impact on earnings per share, which there is with a defined benefit plan because of the accounting profession making a judgment that you have to mark to market at least once a year. There's no impact on your balance sheet. Big advantage because risk capital. There's no market risk. There's no longevity risk. You don't have to worry about people living a long, long time. You don't pay any fees, and you have no fiduciary responsibilities and therefore no legal liability to be concerned with. And the employees love it because in a bull market, they think it's terrific for them to have more control. And Social Security has gone through some important changes, and the two lines have to be understood in parallel. There's been a shifting in the full retirement age. It used to be 65, 1935. It's on its way to being 67. Greenspan Commission worked that out, and it goes along, it's been going along for the last several years, and it will continue until it's done. That's an interesting change. I personally think it's not nearly enough. Replacement rates, the rate of replacement of your pre-retirement income is dropping and will drop from 42 to 36%. Medicare premiums, which you do have to pay, they're mandated, are rising. And the combination of those two puts a real squeeze on what's available for other kinds of expenditures. And more people are finding with their benefits, without any adjustment in the schedule of income taxes, more and more people are finding that they're paying income taxes on their Social Security benefits. Another factor in the changes is rising life expectancy. And if you go down to the bottom, just look at the magnitude of change that's taken place within the lifetime of some of the people in this room. And it's probable that the American Society of Actuaries has underestimated the longevity of the people who are at work today because they can only use data that's already been accumulated. And if people haven't died, they can't count it as data. And people are living longer, and everybody knows that. So you could probably add another 2 years onto the longevity that people are going. Result of that set of changes is that realistically, today, what we meant in 1935 as an age that balanced retirement years and working years would be 65. If you said, okay, I can do that either of two ways. I'm going to hold the retirement years constant and we'll work longer, but have the same number of retirement years. Or I can hold the ratio of work years, retirement years constant. Either one, your choice. The easiest one to accept from a political point of view is surely maintaining the ratio. And that would make 70 be the retirement age now. Keeping that in mind, there's some questions about what could be done by companies, what could be done by employees, and what could be done as a nation. First thing that could be done is make best practices, which are being followed by a fairly large number of companies. And Congress came 5 years ago very close to mandating it, and then backed away and said, no, we won't mandate it, we'll make it a recommendation, and then let voluntary decisions be made. If you made it mandatory, and the reason you might argue for making it mandatory is it's really important for people to get protected in their old age. There's $160 billion a year of underwriting or incentive to corporations and unions and municipalities to be providing retirement security. So if we're putting up that kind of money as a nation, we might want to say, and we want something for it in the way of behavior. It's an easy political argument that go on forever and ever. It's not an easy political argument to resolve. So there is an alternative that I think makes some pretty darn good sense. Require employers to have best practices, but allow employees to make a choice. But instead of making a choice, would you like to be in the 401k plan? Would you like to match the company's match? Would you like to escalate your savings each year you get a raise? Would you like to, no, do it the other way. Unless you say you don't want to, you're going to be in the plan. Unless you say you don't want to, you're going to match the company match. That's free money, it's good for you. Unless you say you don't want to, every time you get a raise, we'll put 1/4 of that increment into your savings rate. And we'll gradually build it up in a way that will be basically painless from your point of view. Unless you say you don't want to, we're going to put you in a target date fund. Unless you say you don't want to, we're going to have you paying out in either the required minimum distribution or at some other level that you choose. But unless you choose deliberately to stay away from the blue plate special or the best probable pattern for most people working in this company, we're going to include you. That would protect freedom of choice, and it makes a huge difference in how many people participate in the plan. Increases plan participation by 20%, or 20% of the 25% that might not play. Increases the number of people who match by comparable. Increases greatly the number of people who get one of those target date funds as a way of investing. And the impact of those changes, all of them, one after another, aggregate to a substantial increase in the amount of funding that people would have in their 401k plan, so that by the time they retire or come to retirement age, they'll be in a very different position. There are a couple of other things you could do. One is reduce the leakages. So it's harder to borrow money, because when it's so easy, many people say, I just really felt that I ought to borrow money to pay off my bills. Well, doesn't that make it easy to then accumulate bills the next time and then do the same thing all over again? Urge people to stay in the plan instead of taking their money out, because when people change from one job to another and they have the money sitting there, it starts to burn a hole in their pocket. It's really hard not to say, you know, we could take a terrific vacation trip. Really hard to say we could do something great for the house. really hard not to say, you know, we could fix up this, we could buy more clothes, we could do something. There are a lot of different ways that you might decide to take some of it, or more of it, or all of it, and spend it, and not have it there for later on. We need, as a nation, to be sure people really understand what working to 70 benefits, how big the benefit is. And we need to understand what rate of distribution you can afford, or, better perhaps, if you want to take out 4%, you have to put 25 times that into the fund. That's the sort of thinking that most people find very hard to do on their own, but if it were done for them, it could make an enormous difference to the way they think. One thing they also need to understand, and this will take us back to the 76, and that's that every year you work after, or you don't claim security, Social Security, after 62, you get a 6% increase. If you take the claiming benefits later, at age 62, you could claim, let's say, an average, this is a convenience number, $1,000 a month. 68 could be $1,245. 67, $1,440. 70, $1,760. Obviously, I'm back to my visual, because in the bottom right-hand corner, you would get, if you, instead of claiming at 62, you claimed at 70. You get 76% more every year for the rest of your entire life, no matter how long you live, and it's inflation protected, so you don't have to worry about that. This is probably the best financial deal that anybody in this country is going to run into in the course of a normal life. And if we could just help people understand how much of a benefit they get by continuing at work, and shift the expectation in our country from you ought to retire at 63 or 4 to go till 70. Even if you did retire, what the least you could do is don't claim Social Security until you get to be 70. So you can make a separation between do you work and not claim, or claim and not work. But then if you thought about it for a minute, said, you know, if you're sticking around for another 8 years, something's going to be happening in your 401k plan too. First, you get to contribute more every year. Let's assume 12%, which seems to be a realistic number for people in their 60s and early 70s. Because in and around that period, your spending level typically dips down because the kids are gone, you stabilize your lifestyle, you probably have been to some of the great adventure trips and you don't have to do that anymore. Then in your mid-late 70s, it starts coming up because you have more medical expenses that are required, and it keeps going up because of the medical expenses. But there is that wonderfully favorable dip in the 60s and early 70s. Take advantage of it and make more contributions, because by that time you know that you're going to be retiring and you know you need more than you otherwise would have. If you don't withdraw annual benefits each year, call it 5%, and you do make large contributions, and you get a return on investments of, I pick 6% as just a convenient number, you change in a formidable way how much you have at the end of that string of 8 years. And if you take the larger amount of 401k assets that you then would have and combine that with the larger benefits that you get from Social Security, you will have enough to be secure in your retirement for roughly 90% of the American workforce. And it is a shame that in our country we are so preoccupied with the Iran negotiations and deal, and with we've got to cut taxes. No, we can't cut taxes. Yes, we've got to cut taxes. And the political process of electing a president is dominant, and there's huge problems with regard to immigration. And how do you deal with that? That is dominating Congress. And this is not an issue of sufficient magnitude to grab the attention of the political process. And the irony is, that is true, but if we could deal with it now, we could deal with it relatively pain-free, and relatively effectively. And we might deal with it well enough to solve the problem. If we didn't happen to solve the problem, we'd have enough time to see that we needed to make some adjustments. But this is an inevitable problem. It's coming our way. And the same inevitable problem is true for virtually every other major nation around the world. and it will cause social problems, it'll cause fairness and justice problems, it will cause political problems, and it doesn't need to be. And I know I sound a little bit like an oncologist or a dermatologist. The oncologist is asking you, please don't smoke cigarettes. And the dermatologist is saying, please don't get a good tan. Because the dermatologist knows that if you went out at 13, 14, or 15, as I did, and got a really dark tan, as I did, that you would inevitably going to see the dermatologist twice a year because of the little bits of infection that come along. I've had 2 different kinds of cancer, so I have some awareness to what kind of difficulty can come from something as innocent and friendly as getting a tan. It's not that. It's the inevitability. It's baked into the system. And we've got a problem in retirement insecurity that's baked into our system that we could change so easily if we took action. Hope that if you get any chance at all, at any time, that you do what you can to help people understand the magnitude of the positives that can come from some minor adjustments. Best practices, unless you opt out. Work to 70, which isn't all that painful when you realize people who worked to 65 were working to the end of their lives. And make the 401k system work correctly. So that to me is the future of finance for most every single human being. And the same problem in the UK, the same problem in China, the same problem in Japan, the same problem in India, the same problem in every nation around the world, one way or another. We as a society know darn well we're living longer. So are other societies. And the system is not prepared for it. We've adjusted the system, tampered with it, and made changes that are negative changes. And if we don't rebalance the system, we're in for serious trouble. Thank you. If anybody wants to ask a question, I'd be honored to answer, but there's no need. Will, over to you.
Thank you, Charlie. One thing you didn't mention.
Old friends from long ago.
Kevin Murphy, formerly of Morgan Stanley. One thing you didn't mention, which I think came up under Alan Greenspan, was the possibility, and I know Chile does this, of a partial privatization of our Social Security. And I guess another thing you didn't mention is also means testing. There are some inconsistencies. I think when Mitt Romney was at Bain, he put a lot of his private equity deals in his IRA, and I think it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. There are things that you can do to tweak the existing system, and I was just wondering to what extent that would be beneficial.
Yeah. Let's take the first one, because that's real easy. Anybody who spent any time in observing individual investors and their behavior, or observing organizations that have tried and tried and tried to do investor education, and I've been deeply involved in both, would be comfortable saying the reality is that we must not ever let people think that they could manage their own affairs instead of Social Security, because that's an insuring program. And it's to guarantee against dreadful poverty, and I mean really extreme poverty. We can't mess around with that, because if we do, and only 2 or 3% of the people screw it up, that will cause harm that'll make Bismarck's railroad accidents look like kids' play. That's a dreadful idea that is based on all kinds of political conviction and has no sense of humanity in the way people actually behave. It's like giving 10-year-old kids driver's licenses and saying, you might be able to handle it. Why don't you have fun, see how it goes? Help me with the second part of the question.
It means testing.
Yeah, means testing, which is to say people who are really affluent might be limited to how much they can put in. I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that we as a society have moved, but you gotta understand, social values, everybody has their own opinion. I think that we've expanded the difference between those who are doing great and those who are doing awful, and that we're better as a nation if we reduce that spectrum. So I have no problem with saying to someone like myself, really appreciate you making contributions to Social Security, Charlie, but the reality is that you were able to earn enough and save enough so that you don't actually need Social Security now. And so we're going to say thank you so much for what you've done for your country. You served in the United States Army, we like that. You paid taxes, we like that. You know, you drove correctly on the more days than not, we kind of like that. You vote on a regular basis, we like that. And we like it that you've contributed to the Social Security program. And you should like it too, Charlie, because that means our country is in a better shape as the family of nations and people. It's a better thing, and we're proud of you. In fact, we're going to send you a certificate from the President of the United States saying, we honor you as a non-recipient so that other people who need the money could actually have enough. I think that would be fine. No, I haven't talked to my wife about it, but you know. And I think most of the people who have had an absolutely gangbusters experience in this country know in their heart of hearts that they don't actually need the insuring part of Social Security, and they could give it up. And so I'm very glad you asked the question. I hope you don't mind the straight answer. Anything else, or can we all go home? I think we're free to go.
So I had one question.
Well, you've kept us, so you better ask a really tough question so that everybody can have a lot of fun watching me squirm.
Okay, no problem. So what you are talking about is asking politicians to make perfectly rational and economic policy changes
Right.
that will cause short-term pain for some people, including politicians who might lose their job, in order to get a long-term benefit. So humans in general, and especially politicians, are usually not so great at incurring short-term pain.
No, that's not fair. Politicians are really good at what they do, but they have to be receptive and responsive to the individuals that vote, and therefore they behave as though they only do. But you talk to any politician, they'll tell you, I'm all for long-term thinking and long-term behavior. It's just my constituents.
So, well, then we need the constituents to also think like this. So my question for you is, totally wonderful analysis. I'm sure almost everyone here agrees with it. Question is, how do we move the political system to implement policy changes to make this happen?
Well, I don't think it's a hell of a lot to ask of corporations that have got a retirement program to go ahead and adopt and accept responsibility for best practices. So I think if you said, we're going to require that for any company that wants to have the tax benefits, this is the deal. We came very close to it. It's exactly what we did have with defined benefit plans were all very strictly controlled. So this is not something that America can't live with. We could live with that one really easily. The thing I think makes it particularly easy is you've got opt-out on every single one of the provisions, by the way, which I would recommend doing it, because that makes it politically much more comfortable for politicians, because it's not something that's going to offend groups of people that worry a lot about the government imposing on them. So I don't think that's a terribly difficult problem. If it came to pass, I don't think that there would be rioting in the streets. I don't think there would be large groups of people getting together. I don't even think people would get particularly upset about it. So I think it'd be relatively an easy item.
One last question.
Sir.
Hello, sir. You've framed the question in a domestic context, I guess, which applies to a lot of developed countries as well. But from like an entire global perspective, considering the demographic changes we're seeing around the world, where in developed countries, population growth seems to be tapering off, whereas the question really isn't clear in other parts of the world. And like, what do you think is the best way? Like, how as a global society is a balance best achieved between high growth and like social welfare for developing countries?
Well, if you get to social welfare, candidly, you've got too broad a spectrum for me to be able to respond. Could I stay with just retirement plans? The modernized or reconsidered 401k. Seems to me to be fine. I personally favor the Australian system because I think it makes so much sense that it's really taken the problem of old age poverty off the table. There's no way that somebody can get to be old and broke in Australia unless they really work at it. And I think that's a very sensible thing to be doing. I don't think that it's anywhere near right for me to suggest at what level people ought to be able to have in their retirement incomes, but I would recommend it to every nation in the world that there's going to be a need to have fairness of the way in which older people are treated. Your parents, your grandparents, people that you know personally are going to be part of this. Your friends, parents, and grandparents will be part of this. And someday, you will be part of this. And I think there's a time when we say fair play requires that we pay attention to the system that is producing consequences. We had a system. We changed that system. And the unintended consequences have been serious. We were assured there's going to be nothing but benefits out of going to the 401k. Everybody was going to be a winner. And it was true, as long as you had 15% compound returns in the market. But in a real world, in normal times, it just doesn't work that easily because it puts too much responsibility for people who just don't happen to have the interest or the skills or the knowledge or the understanding to be able to make the right kinds of decisions. And I believe every nation ought to be working on it. The level that's going to be acceptable will differ from one nation to another. Does that cover what you want, or did you have something as a follow-up? Okay. I'd like to just say thank you for those of you who are kind enough to stay on a little bit longer. I obviously care a lot about this. I care about it because I had no idea how serious the problem was until I started doing some serious study. And the more I did study about it, the more I became really indignant that I didn't know. I was indignant towards myself that I didn't know what the problem was. I had no idea that the difference between claiming it's 62 and claiming it's 70 is 76% more every single year for the rest of your life. And when I go around my smart friends in Wall Street, although I didn't ask you, I should have, their normal answers, oh, geez, that'd be a lot. I bet it's, would be more than 20%. I think it might be more than 25%. Christ, you know, Charlie, it might be as much as 30, even 35% more. Nobody said it's a 76% delta. We don't have that taught in our country, and we need to make that something that people understand. We don't teach people what the benefits of working from 62 through 70 really are, and they are major benefits that change the life of a family in their retirement years. We could do a lot more to educate and make it possible for people to make sensible decisions because they knew. And I do not want to be face to face with angry people who say, you blank, 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 could have told me. God damn it, you knew what was going to happen. You knew all that time and you never ever told me anything. That kind of indignation, which I think we as a crowd will deserve if we don't do something about it, is something I just don't want to have be part of my life. I'd much rather have a nice time with little old ladies and elderly gentlemen and be able to talk to them about what a wonderful country we live in and isn't it great the way things are working out. And I'm afraid that we're accelerating ourselves into something. And when I use the dermatology illustration, it's really the right kind of a thing. Tans look great. Kids love having tans. My brother and I used to compare tans almost every day. We were so proud of them. We both go to the dermatologist. We both go twice a year. We both have had skin cancers that were causing enough anxiety, and the dermatologist says, you better get this taken care of right away. You know, we don't have to do that. And it's sitting right in front of us. It's all in the process. There is no way you can deny it. So let's go ahead and address it. What a wonderful thing it would be if we would take action on this particular problem and solve it. Right now, it's easy. When I was a kid, we were all taught the story about the little Dutch boy who put his finger in the dike. I don't know, is that still taught? And it was wonderful. The kids stopped the water from flowing through so the dike didn't fall apart, so the whole neighborhood didn't get flooded, and it was the little boy did it. And I grew up thinking, wouldn't it be nice? Well, here we are. Little Dutch boy has got his finger in the dike, and we could stop the problem when it's little, easy to solve. It's like, If you're a gardener, you don't wait till the weeds get to be this tall. You pull them out when they're little bitty guys because they're easy to take care of. Same thing. We got a problem that we could deal with. Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you for this.